times out of 10, they chose people that looked like them. So does that mean that like kindergartners are racist? No, but do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's like a lot of it. Also, what it comes down to is people like you want to hang around people that look like you, or that are familiar to you.
I think familiarity to me is more so that, like, because like the reality is, if you grew up around a diverse group of people, from when you were born to like when you were, I don't know, kindergarten age, if someone was like, who do you want to be friends with, you wouldn't just choose a person that's exactly like you. You would choose the people who you are most familiar with, right? And that's the way I see it. So if you grow up somewhere where you don't see any black people, and all you see in the media is black people being like the drug dealer on a show or like the one committing a crime, what else, like what other image in your mind are you supposed to have?
No, that's fair.
Like, how are you supposed to be open-minded?
Oh, I agree 100%. It's like hard because then I also feel like that just like can't be like an excuse forever though.
I'm not saying it's an excuse.
No,
I'm saying
no.
it's just a reality.
No, it's reality,
real.
100%. I just think people like to use that as like a cover.
Of course.
Where they're like, oh, my whole life, like I was from a small town of only white people. Like I didn't know that like I couldn't run around and say the N-word. Like I didn't know. And I'm like, okay, that only works like for so long. But once you're literally like 20 years old, like you know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Like people will use ignorance as a reason.
Oh, of course, always. Like, well, I didn't know. And I'm like, okay, but like they don't like. There has to come a point where like you have to be willing to be like, okay, like I can't be ignorant about things forever. Like it's my responsibility to learn.
Yeah, there does come that point.
Do you know what I mean?
There really does. But like, but that's like why I see the issue is so complex, because it's like when we don't see diversity in certain areas or certain arenas, it creates the opportunity for like racism to happen. Like that's kind of what catalyzes it in my mind. When you don't see, when you have a room of decision makers who are not diverse, like if you have a room of white men making a decision,
oh yeah,
they're not going to see certain viewpoints. They're not going to
100%.
understand certain things. They're not. So then it's like, if that's how the system is built, of those kind of decision makers only, then obviously there's going to be all these. You're going to see like systematic racism.
So wait, how do you feel about things like it's called affirmative action when it's like guaranteed that
You got to
like,
hire a certain amount of
yeah,
people of color.
or women.
That one's a tough one because like it's like when you're hiring people of color to meet a quota, it just seems like there's
I don't even like intent.
Yeah, like there's an inauthenticity around it. Like it just seems disingenuous. Like you're just hiring people to meet a quota because you have to.
But again, does that matter then? If like you want a voice at the table, whether it's forced that they're there or whether it's there, you know, because it's authentically that they're there, like doesn't matter realistically. At the end of the day, like the intent and like the final decision of what the outcome doesn't matter why those people are there. I think long term, yes, but I mean,
I have like my question now is like, we're seeing a lot of companies make these movements on their own.
yes.
Why now? Versus like, I prefer for them to do. I prefer for them to make these changes on their own rather than
Of course,
it be like
being forced or pressured by the
forced
public.
by legislation.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wonder why that's happening now and why this wasn't happening before.
Oh, because a lot of it is, I think, performative activism, 100%. But I also do think that, like, there was, like, a big shift, like, with last year. And, like, George Floyd and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think people really did, like, take a second to be like, okay, wait a minute. I think things are actually happening. Like, this isn't all made up. This isn't, you know, people that's complaining, people being lazy. I think that did, like, kind of, like, spark things in people. But also I do think that it is, like, a lot of performative activism and a lot of people being, like, in order to be in with the times, like, this is what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a statement, like, if you want to be a company that wants longevity in the future.
Mm-hmm. Because I prefer, like, it sucks because, like, a lot of that movement was started from somebody had to die for that movement to start. But I do prefer, in a sense, that companies make these choices based on activism rather than legislation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, of course.
So when I see something like, but back to your question, like, does it matter?
Yeah, that's what I know. That's what a lot of people argue. Like,
Forgetting
does it even matter? I just want the weekend.
So do the ends justify the means? Do the means justify the ends?
Yeah.
Does it matter that legislation forces diversity?
If at like the end, like people are getting represented and things are changing for the better.
I guess in that instance, no, it really wouldn't.
Right? So I don't know either. I think obviously if you want things to genuinely change in society, then yes, like intention does matter why people are there.
But would the legislation catalyze that genuine change? So like if you had to hire a certain amount of black people and people saw the positive outcomes from that legislation, would it just create a wave of change? People are like, you know what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this makes sense. Like this is what it should have always been.
I don't know, because I think when anyone's forced to do anything, they never really want to do it. You know what I mean? Like when anyone's ever forced to do something, I think that then I'm like, would it really like cause change? Or they'd be like, yo, like I didn't even want to fucking do this, but we're forced to. So like whatever. Like let's act how we are supposed to act, but like deep down, like my intentions are still the same. My beliefs are still the same, you know?
It's hard to say because like there are times where legislation really causes like a change in mindset and actually change in behavior. Like for example, we can't text and hold our phones while driving. It seems like at first everybody struggled with that.
Oh, of course.
And then now it's like it's almost unheard of. People like have all these devices. People like it's natural for them.
Oh,
right?
100%.
So like it makes me wonder like is there just I don't want to call it a learning curve. I
think it is for sure. I'm trying to think about, there was just something in Alberta that they just did.
Legislation around diversity and inclusion?
No, about like just something, and everyone was losing their minds about it. What the fuck was it? I don't even remember, but I remember people were, the masks.
The masks.
Like people like mandating masks. People saying that like it was like against like their freedoms and things like that.
Oh.
And like people were like a lot of people in Alberta were comparing it to when well now whatever.
Yeah. Cuz I think that's kind of what happens when any new legislation it's kind of when it's introduced. It's kind of like there's that curve where people want to be against it, they don't understand it. It doesn't make sense.
No, I agree.
Right? And then it gets to the point once they understand it, they can accept it, and then they can actually be an advocate for it.
No, I agree. I think it also just like comes down again. It's like if you don't have any people like that in your life, it's hard to relate or feel like a specific way towards it.
You don't have any people like what?
So let's say like are diverse in your life. Like if you don't have any black friends, it's hard for you to be like, oh, racism is real. Like of course racism isn't real. Like people aren't getting lynched in the streets. People aren't getting, hung up. That's fake. People aren't getting killed because they're black.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen.
Yeah, if it's not your personal lived experience.
Right? It's hard for people to believe.
Yeah. And it's hard for you to even educate yourself because like, who would even expose you to that?
Exactly, right? Because you're like, I don't see it. And again, it goes back to that Jedi argument where it's like, if I don't personally see it, then I don't really believe it.
Yeah. And I think that argument is kind of flawed in my
I agree.
Just because, like, you don't have to see things for them to exist.
Exactly.
Right.
I agree.
I just think, like, when people talk about being educated, I think understanding different kinds of people and being exposed to different kinds of people should be within that discussion.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean? Like being exposed to I think that's like to me some of the most educated people are the ones that have been exposed to lots of different kinds of people.
Oh yeah.
right? And like, if you aren't, if you don't have those experiences, it's just hard for you to be empathetic towards a lot of different things.
Oh, exactly. No, I agree. I don't think that. That's why I think. What's it? Who asked it? Like, does like your schooling like depend on how intelligent you are? And I really don't think it does.
Does your what?
Like the amount of schooling that you have, like a determinant of how intelligent a person is.
I mean, in that arena, maybe if you're looking at like how good you are on a subject.
Oh yeah, in an academia setting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think just in life,
And
like just because someone's highly educated, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're highly intelligent.
no, me neither.
Just like obviously someone who doesn't have a lot of education, I wouldn't say they're not intelligent.
No, me neither. Some of my smartest friends don't have education.
Literally.
Honestly, they're just not good in school. But I think they're some of the smartest people.
Right?
Like, even just having the ability to read people. I think
I think it also comes down to like what do you determine to be like intelligence? I think is what for a lot of people it is.
for me, it's like being adaptable,
Mm-hmm.
being able to read people, being able to communicate.
Yeah.
Like when I was reading the last president's book, or not the last president, but the one before him, his thing was about having the smartest people in the room who were able to communicate messages to him so he could communicate them to the country.
Oh.
And just like the ability to communicate was like, that's what makes him one of the most brilliant people I've ever seen. It's just his ability to communicate a message.
No, I agree. It's true though. Do you know what I mean? Being able to formulate an idea and being able to communicate that and other people understand, I think is a big like sign of intelligence.
Yeah, or you be able to speak in a language that they would understand.
Yeah, exactly. Communicate that in a way for them to understand and for them to fathom.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think that, and like today, especially I think in like Western society, like education is like put on like such a high pedestal. Especially like formal education. Do you know what I mean? Not even like, I think like, even with like Kiefer, like for example, like education that's like passed on like just through like community-based learning. Like I think that is still like considered a lot like lower standard than going to a formal place to learn education. And I don't know why.
I think because like in our society we have a big emphasis on standards. Being able to compare apples to apples. With our education system, if it's standardized, we can say, you're here and you're here.
Well, we do like to compare. We have an obsession with comparing.
Yeah. And standards allow us to compare.
Oh, of course.
Right? That's kind of what it was. Like I remember when I was working out West, I had to take a hiring manager certification course. And it was really about standardizing the interview process so that everybody can be compared equally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And thinking about that, it's like if I had a company, I wouldn't want to standardize the process. I just want to know, like, do I vibe with you? Would you be good for my team? I don't want to know that I have to score you on a to standardize.
Like a scale,
yeah, like there's a
like,
scale
this is
to
where you
score.
fit.
Yeah, I'm like, nah. Sorry, my
No, it's
bad.
okay.
I'm like, I'd rather just know you'd probably be a good fit and be like, yeah, you're the one I want.
I think that works for like people like us, but I also think that like I see like the need to standardize because it's like, how do you ever like compare? Like how would you tell someone to get better at something if they don't have like something to look at to base that off of? If you're like, oh no, just like you weren't good, and it's like, okay, but why wasn't I good? They need to have something to be like to base it off of for someone. Do you know what I mean? Or like if you were like pitching a company to someone, like they need to be like, okay, well, how do you do this? You can't just be like, well, I don't know, I'll just like kind of figure it out.
Yeah, but in terms of if you're interviewing someone to come work for you, is it your responsibility to tell them how they can be better, or is your responsibility to find the best person for you for that job?
I don't think it's responsibility, but I'm saying if you're asked the question.
If you're asked the question, how can I get better?
Yeah, like why, like what was it in the interview that you didn't like moving forward that I could bring to other interviews? If someone were to say it to you and you're like, I don't know, just the vibes were off. You're like, what do you mean the vibes are off?
But is that your responsibility? So for example, like you're in a relationship, you don't like the person anymore. Is there something they could have done better? Why relationship would have worked out? Like, could you tell them like in your next relationship you should improve on this,
You
or
can.
is it just?
You just tell them why they didn't work out for you. But if you just say like you said, like,
But yeah, you chose somebody over them for a reason. That's the reason you would give. For this reason, you were not chosen.
what did you base that off of? Like, there's usually some type of, I think, like for people, they need like something tangible for the reason why you can base it off. Like, oh, this person was more.
I'm sure you could find a reason.
Oh yeah,
if you really want,
to find something.
But do you need standards in order to do that? I don't know if you do. So this person had a little bit more, like, if you had a little bit more experience doing this and you articulated this better, that's why I would have picked you.
I just also think that the issue that people would need standards too is to kind of stop, like biases and things like that.
It's true.
In order to make things like fair.
Yeah. I think that's why they're there ultimately.
Yeah, of course.
But it's like, is that what you would do if you were starting your own business? Would you would you have to have a standard process in how you hire people? Or would you want people to join your team that you thought would just be a good fit?
I think both. I think probably like in the beginning stages, you just want people that you know to be a good fit. But then like later on, I think you would probably want like it to be a little more standardized. I think. What about you?
I guess it depends on the scale of your company.
That's what I'm saying. Like if it's like a
Reality is,
huge scale company,
Yeah.
and people are wanting
Standards
to work for you.
Yeah, when you start having franchises, like
Yeah,
it gets
of
to
course.
that, like you have to have standards. Like that's kind of just unless you feel like you have a team of people who are extensions of yourself that you know will make the best decisions.
No, I agree.
Right? You got to have standards.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that's like why large institutions do that.
Okay. Okay, wait, but so back to the affirmative action thing. So you think it doesn't matter if at the end of the day, like the intent why they're there? Because you know some people are like you should always just have the best of the best, and if like that means that there's no black people at the table, then that means there's no black people at the table. If that means like there's no women at the table, then there should be no women at the table. I know that's what some people are like very like that's what they harp on.
No, you gotta have diversity at the table.
I agree, but I don't know if that's just because like I'm a minority that I think that. Like I don't know if I'm biased in that sense, but that's why I also think that. You know?
Probably, but like, it probably has a factor in why you think that. Because the reality is, it's like you don't. In life, like you have struggles that others just don't even have because of the color of your skin.
No, that's what I agree. Or opportunities that are given to you, or not given to you because of certain like aspects of who you are.
So if we have opportunities that are more available to us because of the color of our skin, I see that as a positive no matter what.
Of course. I mean, that's usually just the argument that I always give, where they're like, oh, like, well, if, like, well, I don't understand why there should be, like, 50% females, 50% males, if, like, the males are a lot more qualified. But, like, to me is that it's, like, you don't know that they were given the same, like, opportunities to be more qualified.
And that's the argument I would make.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you have to think about all those communities where, like,